They're not good enough to start. They're not even good enough to play. But they do talk a good game. So come join Lou and Jose from the sidelines where all the best sports discussions happen anyway. Welcome in to the Benchwarmers podcast.
Welcome into the program, everybody. I'm Lou Ruggieri. That's Jose Ortiz. And this is the Benchwarmers podcast. Wherever, whenever, and however you happen to be listening, we appreciate you taking some time out to spend it with us. We are going to try to make it worth your while. We have quite an NFL-laden show for you this week. Coming up in the second hour, back after a bye week, is our favorite game, Make No Mistake or Give Me a Break, sort of our true-false segment. We obviously have to look ahead to week 10. We're going to touch on our sports betting bit, put your money where your mouth is, and kind of recap some of our stats thus far. A little bit later this hour, we have our highlight and lowlights of the week. We actually have a moral lesson that we learned this week, some injury news and notes, and we also have to now start with our top 5 news stories according to Jose and myself, and hopefully you're going to be listening to those news stories on either the iHeartRadio podcasting app, Amazon Podcasts, Spotify, we're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Play. You can find us on Twitter at the BW Pod, or even email us if you so choose at the Benchwarmers podcast at yahoo.com. Benchwarmers with a Z for marketing purposes. And Jose, what a week to start. Let's just jump into it. We have a lot to get to and not a whole lot of time to get to it. So top 5 news stories according to you and me. Number one, I think, is top 5 is the number one story for a lot of people. The Bills smoked the Seattle Seahawks, dropped 44 points on them. Josh Allen outdueling the mighty Russell Wilson, and to get him back into the potential MVP mode kind of discussion. 415 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, a rushing touchdown, and just, I don't even know what to say. The only thing I can say is that the Seahawks, to me, are starting to feel a little like Peyton Manning and the Colts did about a decade ago, and it just seems like offense, and their defense is just beyond suspect at this point. What was your takeaway or takeaways from this game?
Also, no interception for Josh Allen. We went into this season, you and I talked about it a lot, and we said that Josh Allen was one of the quarterbacks who were in a prove-it year. We put him, we put Sam Darnold, put Baker Mayfield, a lot of quarterbacks from that class.
Yep. And
Josh Allen is absolutely proving it this year. He's absolutely proving that he's not only a quality NFL starting quarterback, he's playing like a top 5 quarterback right now. When you combine his rushing ability, his passing ability, this is a big-time performance. And Russell Wilson, he's a great player. You got to stop turning the ball over. 8 interceptions already this season. You got to stop throwing interceptions all the time. Maybe this is the reason why Pete Carroll likes to keep a little bit more balance and run the ball more. Of course, with Carlos Hyde and Chris Carson injured this week, maybe they weren't able to do what they wanted to do offensively. I'm very, very impressed with what the Bills have been doing. They're showing they can win big games. And as you said, the Seahawks are not going anywhere if they can't get stops. It just seems like anytime anyone wants to score, you do whatever you want against the Seahawks defense. It's not going to work. You cannot get far in the postseason if you can't make stops.
Yeah, and the Seahawks, I mean, they even had Jamal Adams back, who is by far and away their best defensive player. Also, Carlos Dunlap that they acquired last week was in action. Maybe that they have to gel a little bit, and Pete Carroll even said it in his post-game conference. He said that he was expecting the Bills to run the ball, and they came out just throwing. And Josh Allen too, to your point, 31 of 38. I mean, I can't remember the last person that I've seen to take his completion percentage to just such a higher level than he from last year to this year. I mean, that was the big knock against him. He just wasn't accurate. I remember there were games I watched last year where he has the arm strength, but just he didn't have the touch and the decision making. And all of a sudden, it seems like the last 2 games he's been kind of putting that together. And this isn't necessarily our stat of the week, but I thought this was really interesting from NFL.com. Josh Allen had his second game with 400 passing yards and at least 3 passing touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and a 130-plus passer rating against the Seahawks. Allen is the first player in the Super Bowl era with multiple such games in a single season. And there's actually one other stat with him, too. Allen, the first player in Bills history with at least 400 yards passing, 3 passing touchdowns, and at least 1 rushing touchdown in a single game.
Yeah, I mean the Josh Allen is proving that he's the real deal. The Bills are proving that they're the real deal, and the Seahawks are just lucky that everyone else in the NFC West lost. So it was almost like nothing happened because this was a step back for their team, step back for Russell Wilson in the MVP race as well. Just an overall bad week for the Seahawks. They got lucky with the NFC West struggling, though.
Yeah, and that Stephon Diggs pickup looking like a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
9 receptions, 118 yards. Good for him.
And I want to give credit to Sean McDermott with the Buffalo Bills. And honestly, if you remember, I believe in the offseason, they extended his contract, the Buffalo Bills. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I questioned it because I said, well, I mean,
a lot of people did.
They didn't do anything. It's not like, why would you extend him? And it's showing that they believed in his process. And you have to give credit for Josh Allen. Not every quarterback gets better. Look at Baker Mayfield. He's been stuck at basically the same level of play that we've seen him since his rookie year. Josh Allen just keeps getting better and better each year, just like the great quarterbacks do. So this is big things ahead for Josh Allen and the Bills, I think.
Yeah, and what you mentioned with the Seahawks is true. The rest of the NFC West had a very bad week too, and which brings us to our second top 5 news stories of the week. The Dolphins, in a stunner, beat out the Arizona Cardinals 34-31. Kyler Murray went off, 106 rushing yards, 283 passing yards. He had 3 passing touchdowns and 1 rushing touchdown. He was good. He played well, 21 of 26. I mean, unbelievable. And yet somehow the Dolphins they kept up with him and they eked him out at the very end. Tua Tagovailoa, much better performance in his second showing than his first. 20 of 28, 248 yards, 2 touchdowns. He even rushed 7 times for 35 yards, which I thought was a little dangerous, but ended up being for the best. And this game, I was shocked by this, and I guess maybe I shouldn't be after the Dolphins. I mean, we kept thinking that the Dolphins after that rout against the Niners, it was just an anomaly, and then the Dolphins last week showing up, and now again, this is, I mean, against the Rams, they put a beat down on the Rams. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but I am very surprised.
Well, of course you're surprised. No one's going to believe in the Dolphins. It's just hard to believe in them right now. And even if you look at the game, it's hard to really point to any one thing that was like, oh, well, that's the reason why they won. It just felt like the fourth quarter, the Arizona Cardinals offense just kind of stalled. They had a missed 49-yard field goal. They had a failed 4th down conversion, and that led to 10 unanswered points in the fourth quarter by the Dolphins, allowed them to come back and win. But I can't really look at any one thing and say, oh, that's the reason why you lost, other than their defense obviously not being able to get stops against a team that shouldn't really scare anyone on offense. But here they are. And the one thing I will say is, while I put the blame on the defense for this one, it does feel like Kyler Murray and that offense should have been able to come back and kind of at least put some more points on the board in the fourth quarter. I do want to point out, though, the Dolphins have a shutdown corner in Xavier Howard, and DeAndre Hopkins was held to 3 receptions and 30 yards. So,
yeah, the stat line for this game, I mean, the Dolphins were marginally better on third down efficiency. I mean, they were 4 of 8. The Cardinals were 5 of 12. The Cardinals were 2 of 3 on their 4th down conversions, missing on the one that you mentioned. But the Dolphins gave up 3 sacks. The Cardinals only gave up 1. The Dolphins punted 3 times. The Cardinals only punted once. I guess the big difference is that the fumbles they lost, the Cardinals lost a fumble and the Dolphins didn't. But even time of possession was almost dead even. So it's pretty amazing. And I guess it only is a 3-point win, so it should be pretty even. But yeah, it's like smoke and mirrors. I don't know how the Dolphins are doing it, but they're doing it. And good for Brian Flores, man. He's taken a team that was basically a bunch of no-names at the beginning of the season, who still is kind of a bunch of no-names for the most part, and he's making it work.
Is there anything that the Dolphins can do other than just continue to win that would make you believe in them? Because I'm just, at this point, it's like I don't believe that this is going to keep going on.
I don't either. I'm trying to, let's see. Next week they play.
Wow, they have a nice,
They play the
beautiful
Chargers.
stretch.
They play
They
the
have the
Chargers.
Chargers. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's a winnable. I mean, that's a winnable game. I think the Chargers. I think the Chargers are better than the record says they are. But
I mean, look at their next 4 weeks. You have the Chargers, the Broncos, the Jets, and the Bengals.
yeah,
That's they could easily be 9-3 heading into what we thought was a throwaway game, a showdown against the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah.
Next.
I mean, the Chargers are the hardest one on that slate.
And
Wow.
I think I'd still pick the Dolphins to win that game. So just the way the Dolphins are playing, they're at home. Yeah,
I mean, I don't think they're going to catch the Bills, but I mean, the Bills have been kind of up and down a little bit. But I mean,
well, they have a last game of the season, last week of the season. They get to play the Bills. So
yeah, I mean it's crazy to think that actually could come down to that game and who wins that division. That's wow.
The thing that's really crazy is that they actually lost. They lost their first 2 games of the year to the Patriots and then to the Bills, and it's hard to imagine anyone losing to the Patriots anymore. It's like, wait a minute, you actually lost to the Patriots, but you beat the Cardinals.
Yeah.
Like what?
Week one. No, you can't. Every time we overact, never more than in week one, and we're seeing why, because everybody's kind of off kilter, and everybody's got off season to prepare for one game. So. It feels like some teams are preparing for just that week one, and some teams are preparing for the whole season. So, but yeah, good for the Dolphins. I think the Cardinals will be fine. I think Kyler Murray looked unbelievable in a loss. It's tough to say that, but he played almost mistake-free football. So I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, definitely a nice third story.
Yeah, our third story in our top 5 news stories of the week. The Ravens knock out the Colts 24-10, and the Ravens did not play very well. They actually, I think they punted on every offensive drive in the first half, if I remember right. They went on a little bit of a roll. Phillip Rivers obviously was still Phillip Rivers. It was nice to see Michael Pittman back on the field for the Colts. And the Ravens, to me, watching this game, I know it's hard to they won the game. So it's hard to say, even in a win, it felt like a loss. But watching that game, the Ravens feel like they're just stuck in second gear this year. And I don't know if it's necessarily all on Lamar Jackson or if it's just the weak receiving core that they have. But it just feels like they certainly can't run the ball like they did last year. And Lamar Jackson seems like he's just he's hitting his head against this glass ceiling, and I don't know if he's going to break through it or not.
I actually kind of feel like at some point you have to start looking at the play calling of the Ravens, because I agree with you. Their offense just feels, like we've been saying last few weeks, very limited. Just feels like they don't have that same explosion. I mean, this is essentially the same receiving core he had last year. So like, to say it's a weak receiving core, it's the same team. They basically brought everyone back. So this team, he threw 36 touchdown passes last year. Obviously, it was good enough then. They're just not as effective running the ball, and teams are just not as afraid of the run anymore. I guess I don't really know what it is. That said, they did win the game, right? And so they did beat the Colts. The Colts are really the team, to me. Earlier in the season, I said that they were dark horse Super Bowl contenders.
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to back off that a little bit, and it's not only because of this loss. They just don't have any punch on offense. Jonathan Taylor was supposed to be, a good player, a good running back, kind of that next generation of great running backs in the NFL. Tore up the combine, everything was great. And he's been underwhelming so far to start his career. We already know Phillip Rivers is not getting it done. I just don't know who on this offense is really scaring you at any point in time. And so even if Jonathan Taylor was this amazing running back, all I'm trying to do is stop the run if I'm facing the Colts. I'm not worried about Phillip Rivers beating me on a deep pass over my head. So they just feels like they're not going to get anything done until they. I just don't know how you improve that offense, and you're not improving Philip Rivers at this stage of his career. He has 10 touchdowns and 7 interceptions so far this season. That's just terrible. Jonathan Taylor is averaging 3.9 yards per carry, benched back-to-back games. There's just not a lot to be excited about if you're the Colts. And they kind of feel like a team that might fall out of the playoff race as we go forward in the season right now. They're 5-3. I wouldn't be surprised if in 3 or 4 weeks we look up and they're 500 or clinging to a above 500 record.
Yeah, I mean, they're not that division is not quite as bad as the NFC East, but it just feels like that there's no real threat anymore. I mean, we thought maybe the Titans, but they're just the Texans certainly aren't doing it. I mean, they did okay this week, but the Colts were supposed to be this vastly improved team, and yeah, Philip Rivers is just, I think he's more a detriment at this point, and Jacoby Brissett obviously is not the answer. I don't know if they just miss T.Y. Hilton that much. They need him back. Aside from maybe him paired with a healthy Michael Pittman might infuse some spark and some electricity into this offense. But it definitely feels like, even there, I mean, Marlon Mack was pretty good last year, and it seems like with the same kind of offensive line, they're just struggling from top to bottom.
Yeah, but it's just feels like in the AFC right now, there's only 2 teams. You have the Steelers and you have the Chiefs, and then basically there's everyone else. I guess we can at some point start thinking about including the Bills in that discussion. But we were talking about the Ravens not being very impressive. The Colts are not very impressive. Seems like there's a big gap between the upper echelon teams in the AFC and these other teams.
Yeah, I think, and to your point earlier about the receiving core being the same as it was last year for the Ravens. Keep in mind, Lamar Jackson was an anomaly last year. He was something that people hadn't really seen much of at the beginning of last season. But now there's tape on him, and I feel like the threat of him running isn't quite as deadly as it was initially, because now people kind of have a gauge of his tendencies, a gauge of his speed, and an understanding of his speed. And granted, he still makes plays with his feet, but that receiving core is not anything special outside of maybe you could argue Mark Andrews, but he's a tight end. He's not going to be a game breaker. So I think that they need a legit deep threat outside of Hollywood Brown. And
it's weird because Hollywood Brown runs like a 4.3 40. Like he's supposed to be the deep threat. It just seems like every time I watch him throw the ball to Marquise Brown, it's like a bad throw. Like I can't even blame Hollywood Brown for being a bad receiver. I'm just like, well, were you going to be the Jolly Green Giant and jump and catch that? Yeah. Like that's not, it's at some point we have to hold Lamar Jackson accountable for throwing accurate passes or inaccurate passes.
Yeah. Yeah. Hollywood Brown he was 3 receptions, 38 yards. So yeah, I don't know. I'm curious to see if the Ravens can turn this around. I feel like John Harbaugh's a great coach and actually probably a very underrated coach, but we said this last week, and we both came to the same conclusion that Lamar Jackson is starting to have a little bit of a Colin Kaepernick-ish look to him, where it's sort of this one-trick pony where it's like I can throw one kind of ball and I can run fast, and that's it. And if you give D coordinators that kind of telltale signs, they're gonna eat you alive. And Kaepernick did well for a year and then didn't. And it looks like, Lamar Jackson obviously had an MVP season last year, and so far this year, not so much. But, all right, moving forward, our 4th story and our top 5 news stories this week is probably the biggest surprise outside of maybe, I think this is the biggest surprise for me. The Bucs get boat raced against the Saints, 38-3, and honestly, it wasn't even really that close. Drew Brees throws 4 touchdown passes, while Tom Brady throws 3 interceptions, and which, by the way, puts Drew Brees up 3 touchdowns in the all-time record to 564, and Tom Brady's at 561, the all-time touchdown race to this point. This game was embarrassing. I don't know. Is this one of those games where if you're Bruce Arians and Tom Brady, you just say, hey, guys, we're just going to burn the film and just never talk about this ever again? Because, no phase of their their team of the Buccaneers team played well. Offense, defense, special teams. I mean, they couldn't run the ball. The Saints just looked like the head and shoulders above what the Bucs were, and I don't really even understand how that was possible.
Yeah, we both picked the Bucs last week to get the win. And
convincingly, I thought.
Yeah,
I thought the score would be the opposite of what it was.
Well, I didn't think that it would be a blowout on either side. I just thought that the Bucs were the better team, and that when they played the Saints earlier in the season, that it was just, hey, the Saints have been together for a while, the Bucs just got together, that type of thing.
Right. But
now it just feels like on one hand you could say maybe this is just an aberration. This is one bad game, just nothing. They were down early, really quickly. Tom Brady started throwing interceptions left and right. They were trying to shoehorn Antonio Brown into the game, which I think that's kind of one of the things that stood out to me. Is like maybe they should have eased him in a little bit more. Maybe that threw off the timing a bit. I don't know. But the other thought and the fear, if you're the Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan or Tom Brady, whomever, maybe there's a wall that's being hit right now by Tom Brady. I don't want to assume anything, because it seems like every time you assume anything about his age, then he goes out next game and throws 500 yards and everything's back to normal. But
yeah,
I was watching some really bad throws out there last night, really terrible throws, bad decisions, and then also, I'm not sure if you realize this, they had 5 rushing attempts in the game. That's the fewest rushing attempts in any game in NFL history.
Yeah,
the fewest rushing attempts. So they had no balance at all on offense. Part of that's getting down 28-3 or 28-0, whatever it is. I'm going to assume it was an aberration, but I do fear that maybe there's something bigger to it, especially after how they had to struggle to beat the Giants the week before.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, and I kind of had the same feeling, though, about the Saints going into this week, because Michael Thomas was supposed to come back, and whatever's been going on with him outside of the injuries, the team locker room issues, whatever it's been that the Saints are keeping under wraps, I thought that might rear its ugly head. And Emmanuel Sanders was on the COVID list. He's been out. So I thought there would be some chemistry issues with the Saints. Obviously, that was not the case. And if you look at just the stats in this game are mind-boggling. Obviously, we know that total yards 420 to 194. Rushing yards, the Saints had 138 total rushing yards. The Buccaneers had 8 total rushing yards. 8.
Wow.
Third down efficiency, the Saints were 9 of 14. The Bucs were 1 of 9 on third downs. Fourth down, they were 0 and 3. It's the Bucs allowed 3 sacks. The Saints allowed 1. The Bucs punted 4 times. The Saints punted 1. The funny part was that the Saints actually lost 2 fumbles and the Bucs didn't throw any. The time of possession was 2-1. The Bucs had it for just a tick under 20 minutes, and the Saints had it for 40 minutes. I mean, it's just from top to bottom. The Bucs just got embarrassed, and it feels like they just didn't even show up. It's incredible.
It was a complete beatdown. One thing we have to realize is the Saints, they had the 1-2 start at the beginning of the year. Then you mix that with the injury to Michael Thomas, and then a few games where Drew Brees looked a little sluggish, and then they kind of had to eke out some wins against some mediocre teams, and it kind of made us forget just how good this team could be when they click on all cylinders. Yep. And you look up, and now they're 6-2, one of 3 6-2 teams in the NFC, and they're right there in the thick of the Super Bowl race. So, I think that it's probably just a bit of overreaction on early with the Bucs were just playing so well, especially after they just crushed the Green Bay Packers, and then the Packers beat the Saints. So you're like, okay, well, now since the Bucs beat the Packers and the Packers beat the Saints, the Bucs must now be better than the Saints. NFL doesn't work that way.
No.
And so, it's a throwaway game. You're the Bucs, you have to move on. If you're the Saints, you're feeling like, why aren't we the best team in the NFC right now?
Yeah. And we'll see what happens next week. So our fifth top story, fifth of top 5 news stories of the week, which is the right way to say that. There is a sort of a collaboration of things. It's all of the very, very close games that we weren't necessarily thinking were going to be close. And two of the three, I mean, the Raiders beating the Chargers came down to a last play. And, that game I wasn't surprised was close because they seem very evenly matched. And the Chargers, one more time, they're just, I feel simultaneously so bad and so good for the Chargers because they clearly, I think that they have probably gotten the best quarterback in this draft. Maybe we'll still see how Joe Burrow pans out, but Justin Herbert looks like a professional top-end quarterback, and he's played, 6 games now?
Yep.
And they just have lost so many heartbreaking leads. They were up by 14 points, I think, multiple games and lost. They lost 31-26 over the Raiders this week and they had what was arguably a catch in the end zone by, first it was Mike Williams had it and sort of just kind of lost it. And then they got overturned with one more try and the Raiders went in victorious. But the two games that were very surprising, one, the Chiefs barely eking out the Panthers 33-31, and the Steelers going a toe-to-toe, and the Cowboys taking on Garrett Gilbert and almost beating the undefeated Steelers. But the Steelers won 24-19.
Yeah.
But it came down to the very end. So between those two, I mean, which one were you more surprised by?
Definitely the Steelers and the Cowboys.
Okay.
Quickly, the Panthers, they have a decent team. Teddy Bridgewater, decent quarterback. They have some pieces. They can score on you. But the Cowboys, with a third-string quarterback, a team that hadn't really done much offensively in the last few weeks, and then even worse, on defense, they're just giving up points like crazy. Like it's like the Oprah Winfrey of points. Like you get a point, you get points, everyone gets points. Like it's just everyone was just scoring on them, and for them to just not just all of a sudden start playing hardcore defense against the Steelers, it just seemed weird. A normalcy was returned when the Steelers got that win, but it is a little concern. It's minorly concerning that they could have such an off game on offense.
Yeah, and I think that I'm going to chalk up the Steelers playing poorly to two brutally abusive games that they've played in the last two, the last 2 weeks between the Titans and the Ravens. I mean, those guys have to be just taking a pounding. And the Cowboys, I mean, I don't want to go off on a rant, but where was this team for the first 7 weeks of the year? The defense looked like a professional football defense. I mean, Jalen Smith actually made tackles. Trayvon Diggs made tackles. Xavier Woods made tackles. Leighton Vander Esch. Like, it's what happened? Where
was this effort? Where was this effort?
Randy Gregory. I mean, they're just everybody was playing like they were getting paid professionally to play their position, which they have been all year. So what in the hell happened? And Garrett Gilbert, I mean, he looked like he had some zip on the ball. He looked confident. The stage was definitely not too big for him. He looked like he embraced the moment. And for somebody who basically was coming in cold off the bench, more or less, I mean, between him and Tony Pollard looking way faster than Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, way faster. CeeDee Lamb showed up. Mari Cooper made catches. I mean, it's just this team. This is why it's upsetting to Cowboys fans and me especially, because you see the potential. You see what they could be if they were facing an undefeated team, and they almost won. It came down to one play, and they had it in hand, and yet somehow they just pooped the bed every other game this year, almost every other game except for a lucky bounce and an idiotic Falcons team. It's incredible. So where is this team? Where is the coach? What happened?
Yeah, how do you lose 25-3 to the Washington football team, 23-9 to the Eagles, and then have a lead in the fourth quarter against this undefeated Steelers? I don't get it.
And they outgained them on the ground 144-46. I mean, it's incredible.
It's the NFL for you. That's all I can say.
And as far as the Panthers go, I mean, the Chiefs, I have to say this, the Chiefs are in trouble of of starting a real pattern here. They get down early, and I feel like sometimes they forget to, like, I don't know if it's just them getting mentally or physically warmed up, but it feels like they almost like themselves to be in that position to kind of give kind of a little spark to it. So I don't know if they're trying to just give themselves motivation, kind of maybe intentionally or unintentionally, but you can't, there's going to come a point where you're not going to be able to be down to a team and come back. And Patrick Mahomes just unreal numbers. I mean, again, 372 yards, 4 touchdowns, but it just seemed a little concerning, I guess, and that they keep kind of letting teams hang around, and almost spotting them and getting, here you go. All right, now we're going to come back. We've seen it over and over again, but speaking of Patrick Mahomes, I just want to shoehorn in our stat of the week before we have to take a break. So stat of the week actually is there's two different stats of the week that both have to do with Patrick Mahomes, specifically from this week. The first is Patrick Mahomes had 372 yards, 4 passing touchdowns in the Chiefs win, as we saw. Mahomes became the second quarterback since 1950 to have 350 passing yards and 4 passing touchdowns in back-to-back games in a season. The only other player to do that since 1950, Tom Brady, week 6 and 7 of his 2007 MVP season. So that's the first. The second stat of the week that has to do with this week on Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes reached and surpassed 100 in career passing touchdowns in his 40th game. Mahomes reached the century mark 4 games faster than the previous fastest in history, who was Dan Marino, and it took him 44 games to reach 100 touchdowns. So not only does that tell you how good Patrick Mahomes is, that should also give you a hint on how good Dan Marino was, because if you think back to his the NFL is a very different.
That was like 1985. That was like 1985. So yeah.
And Dan Marino was getting clotheslined and drop kicked basically in the backfield. So Dan Marino is unbelievable, but Patrick Mahomes also equally as unbelievable.
We're watching a Hall of Fame career right from the beginning. That's the way it is right now with Patrick Mahomes. So, yeah, great stat.
Unbelievable. So, good for him. All right, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back. We have some injury news and notes to get to. We have a highlight of the week, low of the week. We have a little moral lesson that we learned and more coming up after that. So, stick around. This is the Benchwarmers podcast.
You can reduce your risk of COVID-19 by cleaning and disinfecting frequently touched items and surfaces every day. These items include remotes, tables, counters, light switches, doorknobs, handles, toilets, and sinks. Wear disposable gloves to clean and disinfect. If you can see that the item is dirty, wash first with soap and water or another general cleaner. Then use a household disinfectant to kill germs. Follow manufacturer's instructions for application and proper ventilation to safely use the product. For phones or other electronics, follow the manufacturer's instructions for cleaning and disinfecting. If no instructions, use alcohol-based wipes or sprays containing at least 70% alcohol. Dry surface thoroughly. For more tips, visit cdc.gov.
Welcome back to the Benchwarmers podcast, where being all talk is actually a good thing. Now, back to the action. Or talk, I guess.
Welcome back to the program, everybody. I am Lou Ruggieri. That is Jose Ortiz, and this is still the Benchwarmers podcast. Appreciate you taking some time to spend it with us. Hopefully, you've learned a little something thus far. Coming up in the second hour, we have Make No Mistake or Give Me a Break. It was on a bye last week because we had some mid-season awards to give out, so we gave Make No Mistake or Give Me a Break a little time off. It's healthy, rested, and ready to go at the top of the second hour. We have to look forward to Week 10, talk about our sports bet picks and our regular season picks and kind of go over that. We touched on all the top 5 news stories from Week 9, according to us, in the beginning of this hour. And now we have to touch on, we're coming up in a minute. We have a highlight and low light of the week, a little more lesson that we learned. And right now, Jose, some news, injury news and notes from Week 9, if you would.
Yeah, so I'm just going to run through some of these here. Christian McCaffrey had his first game back this weekend and actually played very well.
Yep.
but unfortunately had a rib or some sort of upper body injury. I've read rib, I've read chest, so we're just going to say upper body injury, and had to leave the game on the final drive. And if you recall, as we were just discussing, they were only down by 2 points, so that's pretty important. He's listed as day to day right now. David Johnson. Oh, were you gonna say something?
No, I was just he played. I mean, he played well. It was nice to see him back in action, and he's a proven weapon. 18 carries, 69 yards, and a touchdown. But he's also a receiver. He had 10 receptions for 82 yards and another touchdown. I mean, he's just just an unbelievable offensive weapon. And the Panthers look like a better team. I mean, Mike Davis has played well.
Yeah.
And they still kind of incorporated him a little bit into the offense. But, I mean, Christian McCaffrey is just proving once again that he's probably the best running back in football.
It's like basically putting the nitrous button into your offense.
Go, baby, go. Yep.
Speaking of the opposite, so on the polar opposite of these special offensive players, not that the guys are bad, but both David Johnson and David Montgomery had to leave their games with their respective games with concussions on Sunday and are now in the protocol. So we'll see what happens if they play in Week 10.
Okay.
Marshawn Lattimore had some sort of injury of the New Orleans Saints, just in case you didn't know. Marshawn Lattimore had some sort of injury, which I can't seem to find the exact specifics on. Left Sunday night's game, never came back in, though some may speculate being by the time he was back on the sideline, they were up by 35 points or whatever it was, so there was no need for him to come back.
I mean, maybe he hurt himself trying to pick off Tom Brady, and he was just getting upset that he didn't get one of those interceptions. But
it was actually after he made a tackle on Antonio Brown and ended up leaving the game at that point. I think it was like one of 2 catches that Antonio Brown had. So, Kyle Allen, feel bad for this guy. Finally gets another chance. Was actually playing decently, and then got injured, broke his ankle, having season-ending surgery. And now Alex Smith gets to challenge Ben Roethlisberger's comeback player of the year award, which is already in the bag. Until we'll see what Alex Smith can lead the Washington football team to the playoffs.
Yeah, and I feel like I owe Alex Smith an apology because we gave out our midseason awards last week, and comeback player of the year, I didn't give it to Alex. I completely forgot Alex Smith had come back, and so I want to retroactively have kind of my La La Land moment, and I forgot to give it to Alex Smith. So Alex Smith, you are and will be the comeback player of the year, even though he did throw 3 interceptions this week. But
we'll see what happens.
What's going on? What's up with Washington quarterbacks and leg injuries, though? I mean, this seems like this is a very concerning trend. I don't know if it's maybe a field issue, but I feel like it was more like because they got tackled weird. But I don't know. That's a little.
It also goes back to Joe Theismann years and years ago. So I don't. That's
a little weird. I wonder if it's interesting.
And our last piece of news. This is just something I wanted to throw at you to get your reaction because I love getting Cowboys reactions from you. Jerry Jones.
Was his pride hurt? His feelings are hurt?
No. Jerry Jones says that once Andy Dalton is healthy, he will return to the starting role. What do you think about that?
I would like to officially proclaim Jerry Jones as the new Al Davis once and for all. Jerry Jones needs to stop making decisions for what happens to the Cowboys on the field. He is he's a fantastic businessman. But he needs to stop interjecting and giving his opinions about what the team should be doing on the field. Because I'll tell you what, Garrett Gilbert has looked,
he looked way better.
Way better than Andy Dalton. And Andy Dalton is a seasoned veteran who looked lost out there. And the team looked like they responded. I mean, I don't know if you can attribute the defensive play to a different quarterback, but I'd like to see another example of that to know whether or not it was a coincidence. So if I'm Andy Dalton, I feel bad, but I mean, you have to, hopefully Mike McCarthy has enough power to say, no, we're not going to do that because we actually want to win games. But again, Jerry Jones, he's officially become Al Davis 2.0, and it's a shame because he could be thought of as one of the best owners ever, but he's not doing himself any favors right now. So that's That's it for news and notes. Highlight, and low light of the week. I'll just jump out. Highlight and low light of the week. I kind of had a tie for this, and I know we're not supposed to do that, but I'm doing it. So my highlights of the week, both just two quarterbacks, Josh Allen and the Bills, and Teddy Bridgewater specifically. Teddy Bridgewater, we kind of, me specifically, kind of just threw him into the trash and just said, all right, well, he's a stopgap quarterback. He's not gonna do anything impressive. He's just gonna, they're gonna help the Panthers tread water. They're gonna get a good draft pick, and then Bridgewater's out the door, a la sort of like a Tyrod Taylor role.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been anything but the case. Teddy Bridgewater is a professional quarterback. He had a run and a diving play that I think he scored a touchdown on, or no, he made a first down with a diving play, and then he ran into the end zone. So obviously his knee's feeling better, and he looks great. Josh Allen, I mean, we saw what he did. We heard what he did. He's improving at a very high rate, and he hasn't given up. It would have been easy to just throw in the towel after those couple bad losses on primetime TV, but he did anything but that, and looks like the real deal. So those are my highlights this week.
Yeah, and it's not much. I mean, we were just heaping praise upon Josh Allen so before, so I'm not going to add too much to it. But yeah, Teddy Bridgewater has been great, and it kind of looks like maybe the Panthers already do have their quarterback in the future and just need to draft someone in the next year or two and have a good backup ready to go in case he gets injured, because it seems like they have a guy they can win with right now. My highlight of the week is Dalvin Cook. And you said earlier that Christian McCaffrey is the best running back in the NFL, and that may be so. But Dalvin Cook is staking his claim to it this season. He this past Sunday, 206 yards, 2 touchdowns. Following up, the week before, he had 223 all-purpose yards and 4 touchdowns.
Yeah.
He's leading the NFL in rushing yards, leading the NFL in rushing touchdowns. Just a great, great, great player. One of those few. I have to really think about it, but right off the top of my head, it's Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, and Dalvin Cook as these really super special running backs that there's just no replacement value. There's no, we're just going to get this guy in and he's going to do just as fine. There's such a difference between when Dalvin Cook touches the ball and Alexander Mattison, who's the backup for the Vikings, touches the ball. He's a special, special player, and I wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, I mean, Dalvin Cook, I don't think Christian McCaffrey is the best running back in the league this season. I mean, obviously he's been hurt too much. So, but yeah, Dalvin Cook, when he puts it all together, I mean, he was injury prone a little bit early on, but you start to say, well, I remember thinking, like, how could the Vikings jettison Adrian Peterson, a guy like Adrian Peterson, for anybody? And now you're starting to see what the Vikings saw in Dalvin Cook, and that he's also a pretty special player. So it is impressive what he's done so far. So absolutely, that's a good highlight. My low light of the week I mean, this is obvious, but Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. I mean, my God, they just I don't even know what to say. I mean, that was an embarrassment on primetime TV, and they did nothing right. And they should. I hope that this fuels them further, for the rest of the season. But you can't lose that convincingly to a division rival like that and still expect to do anything. I mean, that's the confidence that the Saints have now going against the Buccaneers is almost going to be insurmountable. And I don't know what happened, but hopefully they don't do it again, because I root for Brady. He's the GOAT, and he should act like it.
He's the GOAT. He's not the GOAT in his prime. If I'm Bruce Arians, if I'm Tom Brady, I'm just rallying the troops to say, listen, we're still 6-3. We don't have to play the Saints anymore this season. We just pick ourselves up and get a win next week. That's all you can do.
Yep. Unless they meet in the playoffs.
Yeah, you'll worry about that in 6 or 7 weeks. In the meantime, let's just worry about the next game. But yeah, that was about as embarrassing. That was about as bad a performance as you could have at the quarterback position. And part of the reason they got Tom Brady is because Jameis Winston would do things like that to them regularly and give them no chance to win. So it's a little surprising to see that. It's one thing for him to not throw a high yardage or maybe for a lot of touchdowns, but to throw 3 interceptions, that's just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, Jameis Winston might have thrown 7 if he was playing, so it's probably an improvement. But yeah, I don't know.
All right, so yeah,
low
my low light of the week. I'm focusing on the Bears. The Bears lost their 3rd straight game. If you remember, at one point they were 5-1, looking like the darlings of the NFC North, and now they're 5-4. And I guess we all knew that the 5-1 start was a mirage. But over the last 3 games, they're averaging just a little over 16 points per game. Nick Foles has 4 touchdowns and 3 interceptions in the last 3 games combined, and he's been sacked 12 times during that stretch. I was looking at their rushing yards. Over the last 6 games, they're averaging 2.7 yards per carry. It's just, this offense is just bad. And I actually think that one of the mistakes that they may have made is in assuming that they weren't bad and trying to go get Nick Foles, which once again, I've already, we're just going to call him Cinderella because it's been hit midnight for him. But you were better off sticking with Mitch Trubisky, giving him 1 more year, and going ahead and taking your top 5 draft pick. Because now you've got 5 wins. You're probably going to end up with like the 11th or 12th pick, which is not going to help you very much.
Yeah, and Matt Nagy seems like he's a pretty smart coach. I mean, he seems like he's kind of doing things that are pretty innovative. But yeah, Nick Foles is clear. I mean, we've seen it time and time again. Nick Foles is not an every week starter. He's just not. He has a little bit of magic, and it goes a long way sometimes, but it doesn't actually go for a long time. And yeah, I mean, the Bears defense is very good, but you can only be on the field so much before you start getting winded and getting beat. And I don't know, the Bears offense, instead of playing offensive football, the Bears look like they're just playing offensive football. I mean, it's just pathetic.
And to bail out the defense a little bit there, like at some point you need your other side of the ball to win you a game, right? Whether it's the Seahawks and they need their defense to win them a game, or it's the Bears and they need their offense to win their game. You can't put all the pressure on one side of the ball week in and week out. It just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, I mean, Ray Lewis even asked, for 10 points a game in that fabled Ravens defense. So, the Bears should be able to do something in that, at least
mm-hmm.
do that. I mean, they gave him 17, but come on, all right. So that'll do it for the first half, except for our moral lesson. A moral lesson this week is pretty simple, and it's actually football related. It comes from the legendary Tony D'Amato, a.k.a. Al Pacino, from Any Given Sunday. And on Any Given Sunday, you're going to win or you're going to lose. And we saw that in full effect this week. Some very surprising wins and losses this week, and some very surprising almost wins and almost losses. And so that's sort of the moral lesson is, every time we think we know something, we learn that we don't. And so that is going to do it for this hour. And hopefully, once again, I think I forgot to mention it earlier, we are on the iHeartRadio podcasting app, Amazon Podcasts. We're on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Twitter @TheBWPod. You can even email us, hate mail, love mail, whatever you want. The Benchwarmers podcast @yahoo.com. Benchwarmers with a Z. So we're going to come right back. Hour number 2 is going to start right after this.
Thanks for listening to the Benchwarmers Podcast. Follow along with us on the Benchwarmers Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. And don't forget to review us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.